1086. William the Conqueror has successfully held England for 20 years, but it's not an easy task. How can he defend himself and his people? The solution was this: castles, a stone embodiment of Norman domination. This is my favourite castle in all of England. Here, behind these formidable stone walls, some of medieval history's biggest moments were played out. This is Ludlow Castle. Standing proud on the wild western frontier between England and Wales, Ludlow gives a vital glimpse of how people lived and worked in these stunning spaces, and just what Norman power really looked like. For centuries, castles have loomed over the landscape of Britain. In this series, I'm exploring some of our greatest fortresses, investigating how they helped forge a nation, and discovering how you build a castle and how you tear one down. Walter de Lacy, the first owner of Ludlow Castle, had crossed the Channel with William the Conqueror in 1066. His reward for their success was the earldom of Hereford, close to Wales. Ludlow Castle is located near the Welsh border, in the modern county of Shropshire, and stands proudly on the west side of the town. Ludlow offered the ideal location to site a castle. It's protected on two sides by a bend in the River Teme, and on a third side by the River Corfe. The fourth is sheltered by the town. It makes it so highly defensible here. And it needed to be easy to defend. This part of England was a frontier that demanded constant vigilance. Ludlow sat in this wild west and had to be ready to protect itself against all comers. But what did Ludlow Castle look like when it was first built after 1066? The first structure here in the immediate aftermath of the Norman conquest was made of wood. There was a timber ringwork enclosure of the kind that's quick to construct in hostile areas. The Normans proved impossible to dislodge, and by 1085, Ludlow, like other Norman castles in England, was transforming from wood to stone. Three of the towers here, at the northeast, northwest, and southwest corners of the curtain wall, are survivors from that early Norman building. One of Ludlow's interesting architectural features is the arch of stone that we can see in the front of the keep there. That's the old way into the castle. A couple of centuries after it was built, it was bricked up and moved to the side where we access the castle now. This new doorway was positioned to help better defend the castle and to turn the former entrance tower into a more recognisable keep. Ludlow has an inner and an outer bailey. The outer bailey would have been a bustling hub, housing every trade a castle needed, from the blacksmith to the brewer. The inner bailey at Ludlow was home to the kitchens, a well, the great hall, and comfortable apartments. But unlike Bamborough, Ludlow's inner bailey is surrounded by a moat. A moat is a large ditch around a castle which can be filled with water. This can be a barrier against digging or tunnelling under the inner bailey, and can help hinder the use of devastating siege weapons such as battering rams or scaling ladders. A drawbridge once sat across this dry moat, It's a door that can be lowered and raised when needed to protect the inner bailey from attack. Most of the towers at Ludlow are rectangular, and like many Norman castles, it has a keep. This is the inside of Ludlow's keep, the defensive heart of the castle. And down here, you can still see one of its last lines of defences. These are murder holes. They're literally holes in the floor, but they look down on that original entrance into the castle, so that from here, defenders could drop down anything they wanted on someone attacking the castle. All of these features speak to the need to be constantly on guard. Attack was never very far away. And if enemies were coming, you'd want to have everything you needed to survive inside Ludlow's inner walls. Castles usually had a chapel, so the users didn't need to leave the space during a siege to pray for God's help in their success in war, as well as not having to join the masses in the local church if they didn't want to. Here, in the heart of the inner bailey, stands St Mary Magdalene's Chapel. It was built in the 12th century, and it's a rare example of a round chapel that mirrors the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and links to Templar ideas. There are only 4 surviving Norman round chapels in Britain, and this is one of them. It was commissioned in the early 12th century by Gilbert de Lacy, the grandson of Ludlow's first owner, Walter. The pattern of alternating chevrons and plain carvings around the walls is a fashion from that period. The lower windows were added in the 16th century when a second floor was created. It used to be linked to the Lord's apartments by a tunnel so that they didn't have to get wet on their way to chapel, and it's still an incredibly evocative place today. Ludlow has one mystery that's captured my imagination since I first came here as a child. This is something that had fascinated me for years about Ludlow Castle. My childhood mind went wild wondering what this could be. Castles weren't just built for defence. People had to live here too, and this particular space has a rather cool purpose. As a kid running around Ludlow Castle, I'd convinced myself this was some sort of prison cell, that the moat would be filled with water and people locked in here would be floating as part of their punishment, that the light from above was a way of people checking up on them, but maybe also poking fun at them while they're being tortured. Turns out it's nothing quite so sadistic. Ludlow's moat was never filled with water, the stones porous, so that it was always just a dry defensive ditch. This is Ludlow Castle's medieval fridge. It's cut into the earth of the outer bailey so that it's always a few degrees cooler than anywhere else. The curtain walls that surround the outer bailey are made from locally quarried limestone. These walls had a crucial role in medieval warfare, providing protection and acting as a deterrent to anyone daring to rebel. Which was especially important in a castle like Ludlow, which was living under constant threat from neighbours in Wales and along the marches. But these walls are also an architectural feat and are a testimony to the skilled craftspeople who created them nearly 1,000 years ago. Teams of stonemasons would travel across the country building cathedrals and castles. Even gluing the stones together required unique and specialist knowledge. I'm travelling to a stonemason's yard near Ludlow to meet Master Mason Ben Macmillan to find out how similar his work is to the ways they used to build castles just like Ludlow. Ben, thank you so much for having us. So we've got our nice stone. How do we turn this into a nice looking wall?
Now these obviously could be as big as you like. I mean, you could get early cathedral work, castle work. You can get units of ashlar which are, you know, impossibly large for a human to lift. So the lifting equipment that we're going to use today is a Lewis pin. So this is a Lewis pin, which is a Victorian version of the three-legged medieval Lewis pin.
In the medieval period, stonemasons building a castle like Ludlow would have used something like what the Victorians called a Lewis pin. It would have had a central pole and had 3 legs surrounding it, which worked on a hinge. A hole is drilled into the stone and the Lewis pin is added. Once the chain is attached, the distribution of weight means that the legs kick out and grip the internal section of the block, and then we can begin lifting up.
So if you'd like to put it in the hole for us, we've already drilled the hole.
Yeah, we'll give this a go.
That's it, keep them together at the same height as it goes down. Just, there we go, that's as deep as we're gonna get it. We'll just latch that on there. You can wind that one for me. That's it. That's gonna begin to lift now. And there we go. Okay, that'll do.
We wonder how people get to tops of castles, tops of cathedrals and things like that. This is effectively how they would do it.
More chain, more gears, and there's almost nothing you can't lift.
Fantastic. So now we know how to lift a block. How do we get these stones together? So what kind of mortar would a medieval mason have used to lay his walls?
He would have essentially used a lime mortar mix, so local sands and lime from wherever they can get it. I mean, we've got the Wenlock Edge here in Shropshire, which used to produce lime. The lime we buy now is hydrated, but they would have bought lime putty. That's what would have been available. Lime putty gets mixed with local sands. Now, the mortar that we're creating here is not designed to be brittle at all, because you're not using the mortar as an adhesive grab. All you're really doing is trying to create a very soft cushion of lime, which will stop the stones cracking each other. So here's one I made earlier. It's nice and smooth. Now, the stone is dry that we're about to lay on. And obviously, when that stone lands on that one, you're trying to create suction and movement in the mortar to get a fix. And it's going to take a sip. It's going to drink the water, essentially, because the stone is dry. We're going to wet the stone, and if it goes too dry too quick, you're not going to get that option. So we're just going to lay a little bed in here. If we just bring that over, okay, and when you're ready, if you want to start winding it down.
This one?
Yep, looking good. Hang on, steady, steady. Okay, keep going. There we go. We take a sponge and we'll just clean that down. And there you go. And so on and so forth.
Just several thousand more times and you've got yourself a castle.
Yes, exactly that.
Now we know how to construct the walls of a castle. What did it look like inside? Was it all grey stone like we see today? Archaeological evidence from this flourishing, colourful community can be found all over Ludlow and its castle. To explore some of these objects, I'm meeting the resident archaeologist, Leon Bracelin. This piece of tile is beautiful, a bit of decoration on it. What do we know about this?
Well, that is a monastic tile, and it was found just outside of the castle. And this dates to probably 1480, 1500. It's quite thick, it's chamfered, and it's high status. It's really showing opulence and wealth.
So these tiles are maybe less pretty, but do they tell us a story as well?
They do. What it's showing here is this lovely green splashed glazed ware. And the Normans actually were the first to use the glaze, using really crushed copper in the firing process.
And perhaps one of the most unassuming things on the table is this block of white stuff.
Yeah, I love
Why
this.
is that important?
When we're looking at the castle, we're looking at the bare bones, but in fact, a lot of it, especially the inside of the rooms, were plastered. You know, Mary Magdalene Chapel, To some extent, that was plastered on the outside, and it was highly decorated. But what they had is they were using local lime. They were mixing it, look, you can see here, with horsehair. In its early building phase, what they would do before they applied this plaster, they would get this dried out wood, stuff the rooms with this wood and set light to it to dry the walls out. And thereafter, they would come in with this plaster and then apply it.
It's easy to forget how colourful and vibrant Ludlow would have been in its medieval heyday. As the homes of nobility, castles like this had to be comfortable, warm, attractive places to live, as well as fortresses. Today, Ludlow is ruined. It's stripped to bare grey stone walls. But I love to imagine this place with fires blazing in the hearths, with colourful walls decked with tapestries and fabrics. Wherever castle interiors are recreated for us, it's clear to see the vibrancy of the medieval world. Many of Leon's finds through the years highlight how closely interconnected the town of Ludlow is with the castle.
And how do some of these finds link the castle to the town?
It's thought that the town developed more extensively after they constructed the castle. But in fact, the archaeology that you've got in the castles is telling a story of the life of the castle. It was showing the potters, the plaster makers, every industry, and they would have kind of come into the castle and been part of that.
That closeness of the town and the castle helped to establish Ludlow as one of the strongest fortresses in the region. The archaeological evidence Leon and his team have found and the architecture that remains at Ludlow help to give us a vision of what the castle would have looked like in its medieval prime. But what about the people who lived here? Between its construction and the early 14th century, Ludlow changed hands between several wealthy families. By 1308, Ludlow Castle had passed into the possession of one of the 14th century's most notorious men, Roger Mortimer. Roger would join forces with Edward II's queen, Isabella of France, to depose her husband. But Roger soon fell foul of Edward's son, Edward III, and was executed. Roger's son and grandson rebuilt the family's fortunes, becoming close to Edward III and serving in France in the 100 Years' War, a century-long conflict between France and England over the French crown. Such was their success that Roger's great-grandson, Edmund Mortimer, married into the royal family when a match was made with Edward III's granddaughter, Philippa of Clarence. When the Mortimer male line died out in 1425, their lands and titles passed to Richard, Duke of York, via his mother, Anne Mortimer. Ludlow became royal property in 1461 when York's son became King Edward IV.
The story of the Mortimer family is a fascinating one. Their careful gathering of power led to a meteoric rise in one generation that almost tore down everything that they'd achieved. Once rehabilitated, they managed to marry into the royal family, and that's a match that would define English and British history throughout the 15th century.
Part of the reason I love Ludlow so much is its connection to the Wars of the Roses, my favourite period in history. The Wars of the Roses lasted on and off for more than 30 years and was based around the fight between two royal houses, Lancaster and York. The House of Lancaster is now often symbolised by a red rose, though that wasn't a badge they ever used, and York by a white rose, which was one of their symbols at the time. The House of York in 1459 was led by the owner of Ludlow Castle, Richard Plantagenet, 3rd Duke of York. The House of Lancaster had at its head King Henry VI. Richard, Duke of York, believed he was defending England by opposing Henry's bad Lancastrian rule. Those who supported the king obviously disagreed. If any of this sounds familiar, it might be because Game of Thrones, the TV adaptation of George R.R. Martin's books, took its inspiration for the complex fight for the Iron Throne from the turbulent times of the Wars of the Roses. Ludlow would be the site of a moment that finally set England on a path toward dynastic civil war.
A Cold War set in England as those loyal to the Lancastrian crown squared up to those siding with the Yorkist faction. The peace was shattered in 1459 when York mustered all of his forces here at Ludlow. That particular moment, though, is also an aligning of the stars for me. It's the first time we see all of the male members of the House of York together in one place.
Amongst them was the head of the family, Richard, Duke of York. His eldest son, who would one day be King Edward IV, and his fourth son, Richard, later Duke of Gloucester, and then Richard III. And also here at Ludlow, there was one of the great power brokers of the time, Edward and Richard's first cousin, the Earl of Warwick, the famous Kingmaker. They were all walking through these spaces, forging relationships that would define the next 30 years of English history. But King Henry VI and his Lancastrian supporters weren't about to let the Yorkists have Ludlow to themselves. The two sides were now on a collision course.
In October 1459, the Wars of the Roses arrived here in Ludlow, clad in armour and hungry for vengeance. A royal army poured through the streets of the town in what would be remembered as the Battle of Ludford Bridge.
Henry VI's royal army was here to crush the Yorkists. The king offered safe passage to anyone who would switch sides and rejoin the royal force. During the night of the 12th of October, some members of the Yorkist army, who were part of the Calais garrison, fled to accept the king's pardon. It left the Yorkist leaders in a perilous situation.
In a panic, all of the senior males made their way back to the castle. They told their men to prepare for war in the morning and they would be back. They were coming here for a council of war to decide on a course of action. But as the sun rose on the 13th of October, the men found that their leaders were nowhere to be found.
York, Warwick, and the other leaders had escaped in the night. They left their men and the town to their fates. The castle was breached, the royal army was unleashed, and Ludlow was sacked. Gregory's Chronicle, written by a contemporary London merchant, recorded the misrule of the king's gallants at Ludlow. When they had drunk enough of wine that was in taverns and in other places, they robbed the town and bore away bedding, cloth, and other stuff, and defouled many women. York was declared a traitor and lost everything. It was this battle that turned an argument about how to govern into a full-blown dynastic war. In the immediate aftermath, the Yorkists would return, claim the throne, and be propelled to power. Edward IV became the first Yorkist king. Ludlow was now a royal castle. The twists and turns of the Wars of the Roses would continue sporadically until the 1480s, with huge wins and terrible losses for both sides. Ludlow's royal connections, forged by the Wars of the Roses, would continue, and when Edward IV considered where to have his son and heir raised, he settled on Ludlow Castle.
Edward himself had been raised within the walls of Ludlow Castle. It must have held good memories. Edward even set down a list of ordinances for how his son's household should be run, which paints a really nice picture of daily life within the walls of this castle. The ordinances say that Prince Edward should be woken at a convenient hour according to his age. He would then say his prayers, dress, and go to chapel to hear mass.
After breakfast, he was to undertake such virtuous learning as his age shall suffer to receive. The afternoon was to be spent in such convenient disports and exercises as behoveth his estate to have experience in. The king further insisted that the prince should be surrounded by good, honest men, and no customable swearer, brawlers, backbiters, common hazarder, or adulterer.
If you know anything about Edward IV, you'll realise just how amusing that last provision is. It's almost a list of everything that Edward IV himself was, but he wanted kept away from his son. He obviously felt Ludlow was the right place to raise a prince, building on the blocks of his own experiences here. Ludlow was becoming a school for future kings.
Edward IV died unexpectedly in April 1483 at the age of just 40. He was succeeded by his 12-year-old son, who was proclaimed as King Edward V and left the castle and town of Ludlow to travel to London.
But he would never undergo a coronation. He's best remembered now as the elder of the princes in the Tower. But history would soon repeat itself. Another prince would come here, prepare for a life as king, but would never rule England.
Edward V's sister did become queen. Elizabeth was the wife of Henry VII, the first Tudor monarch. Their eldest son Arthur came to live in Ludlow Castle. He returned to London to forge a sensational dynastic alliance by marrying the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon.
And the royal couple then returned here to set about building their lives together. You can still see the remnants today of the Tudor renovations designed to transform this fortress into a comfortable royal palace. There are square Tudor windows and Tudor chimney stacks. Any married bliss here, though, was to be short-lived.
Arthur died here at Ludlow Castle in 1502, aged 15. There was now a new heir, a name imprinted on our popular consciousness, Henry VIII. He would marry Arthur's widow, Catherine, and become one of the most infamous monarchs in English history. Ludlow, on the other hand, after the loss of two future kings, would no longer be the training ground of princes. The royal glitter had been lost. It remained the administrative capital of Wales and saw a brief resurgence of military importance in the Civil War of the 17th century before it began to fall into ruin. From the immediate aftermath of the Norman conquest, Ludlow was identified as an important, defensible spot. Its location on the violent and unstable fringes of Norman control meant that it was rebuilt in stone earlier than most. And it's been here ever since, an immovable testament to the importance of this outpost of power and its role at the heart of history.
A trip to the top of Ludlow Castle rewards the visitor with a view from the top of the keep that explains why the castle was built here. It dominates the town and the surrounding countryside for miles. Ludlow touches so many defining critical moments in English and British history, and it's all wrapped up in these beautiful buildings that will tell their own stories of frontier defiance, of dynastic conflict, and of royal luxury.
In episode 3, we cross the border Ludlow once defended and head to the incredible Conwy Castle on the north coast of Wales. At this symbol of Edward I's conquest, we'll unlock stories of royals, rebels, and the rise of the ancestors of the Tudor monarchs. British history will be changed forever.